of that asset, and consequently what kind of consumption occurs of basic products and services, and part of quality of life, whether it is health and education and nutrition and those kind of aspects. And if you look at consumption on the other side, top 10% account for as much as 60% of all consumption, whereas the bottom 50% account for 2.5% of all consumption. So the consumption side, which is otherwise supposed to be slightly more balanced because pretty much everyone requires similar amount of calories from a nutrition point of view and same level of capacity building when it comes to health and all of that. Even there, the level of skew is so stark. So obviously, if you're looking at these numbers, going back to the question, who is excluded and having that kind of a disparity, is that the sections of our population who get excluded because they suffer from certain inherent disadvantages, partly out of asset ownership, which is already something that I mentioned about, our access to income generating information and knowledge as the other piece, access to markets when you look at selling the output. Farmers is, for example, is one such section of the society. Within India, if you were to look at, 50% of all India's workforce is still generating the primary livelihood from agriculture. But the per capita GDP of a farmer in India is less than 1/4 of rest of us. And that's a very shameful number in terms of the level of disparity and the level of exclusion that you look at. I mean, not only farmers, there are obviously other sections, even whether it's rural craftsmen, so a whole set of rural people part of that segment, are people with physical disabilities and a whole host of people who are around us but get excluded because of one or the other reasons that I had mentioned and therefore get excluded. So when you're talking about inclusive growth, there is one lot that we are saying must be included in this phenomenal growth that is occurring around the world, and more particularly from our own context in more recent times in India as well. There is another set of people who are getting excluded, and that is the context in which we use another phrase like sustainability. And this set of people are our grandchildren and their grandchildren. I mean, they don't even have a say in what we do today. But whatever decisions we take for our economic growth today, in terms of use of natural resources like water, or the environmental degradation that we cause as part of our economic growth, all of that are decisions taken today but have bearing on their lives when they come to live on this planet some years from now. So this is another set of people who are completely excluded because it's not even physically possible for them to participate in the dialogue that is occurring. Well, one uses environmental sustainability as a surrogate, but that's another segment that is completely excluded from the outcomes of the growth process that we are doing today. And in that context, if one were to look at similarly some numbers on what's happening to environmental degradation, much in a similar manner that I talked about a few economic disparity issues. And similar kind of a time frame, if one were to look back and say those 50 years are in just about last half a century, the world has lost about 1/4 of the topsoils, lost about 1/3 of its forest resources. Many species other than these plants and trees, many other species in the animals and birds and insects have become extinct in this period. 1/3 of global diversity has been lost just in last 35 years. And 70% of coral reefs are going to be lost in our own lifetimes. And if you were to convert all of these into one metric, it now takes Earth about 1 year and 4 months to regenerate what we consume every year, whatever resources that we are consuming from the year. So if you are earning in that sense equivalent of 1, you are spending equivalent of 1.3, that's a trap that you get caught in, and therefore there is no way you can regenerate in a manner all these resources that I talked about, that it becomes sustainable for us and the subsequent generations to live. I mean, that's the level of damage that is occurring. Closer home, if you look at India and look at natural resource base in India and compare all of that with the amount of population that we have, we are, as you would know, about 17% of global population, but we have just about 2.4% of world's land mass. So that's a resource that one has with that level of skew. Or just about 4% of world's fresh water is in India. Already half of India's 600 districts are water stressed. And we only have about 1% of world's forest resources. So with these 1s and 2s and 4s, which are also dwindling, and compared with 17% of population, and compared to the kind of ratios that I talk about for the world, if any, the whole issue of inclusive growth and sustainability are even more urgent and imperative as far as India is concerned. And therefore, both these segments of people who are already suffering disadvantage for various reasons, who are excluded, as well as people who don't even exist for a while, and the disadvantage they will be in because of what we are doing today, are people that we would like to include and make everyone's lives more sustainable. And that's the context of the topic that we are talking about. And that brings me to the second question that we have to deal with. Why should industry have a perspective on this? Actually, there's a valid argument that business or industry is a pure economic citizen, as opposed to individuals like us. Organizations as entities get created for an economic purpose, as the conventional argument goes. And the purpose of any pure economic citizen is earning profit, and their social or economic responsibility gets served when taxes get paid as part of the profits that are earned. And from then on, after the taxes are paid, other organs of society should take over, whether it is government or civil society and every other organ in some form. So what is industry doing in that argument? That you generate profit by servicing consumers in a competitive environment. That's what you are operating in. That itself is considered a socially responsible act on part of industry. Yeah, I mean, obviously, this is one perspective where tax evasion itself is a norm in many countries, including ourselves, and where as part of generating that profit, there is exploitation from a social perspective, from a natural resource perspective. If you do that without being that over-exploitative or within the boundaries, and pay your taxes, and every other part of the social system as the organisms are developed should take care of the rest, and everybody trying to do everything doesn't really work, is that argument. And that's how capitalism has worked around the world all this while. And at one level, it's a decent argument. Obviously, if someone is not functioning, you better improve functioning of that organ of society rather than saying that someone else should do that role. But nonetheless, although this is the majority perspective, and although there is some amount of rethinking that's happening around the world in light of various happenings in the more recent past, there is also another perspective that industry or business is not a pure economic citizen. They are what you can call a socio-economic citizen. And that is the view that ITC subscribes to. And the argument here is that the business is accountable to both today's and tomorrow's society and environment from which it is drawing its resources. It goes beyond the pure economic citizen argument. And in that context, enterprises must go beyond earning profit and demonstrate positive economic and social bottom line and performance over long term. And what is more popularly known as a triple bottom line approach to business performance. At this time, this perspective is in some sense by exception. Not too many people still subscribe to this view, but is gaining ground. There are more and more companies around the world are subscribing to this perspective that yes, there is accountability beyond generating profit and delivering value to the shareholder, but there is an accountability to a wider set of stakeholders, and in that context include the set of people that we talked about exclusion. And given the level of income disparity as well as the environmental degradation that I talked about, there is every reason for business or industry to supplement whatever that the governments or other civil society organizations are doing. And there is also a need from that perspective as well. If after decades, if not centuries of effort in this direction, we still have this level of contrast, there is a need to explore alternative solutions as well. And there is also an argument that in any case, the businesses cannot prosper in societies that are failing. Thank you. And given all this, and assuming more and more businesses and more companies accept the argument and the perspective that it is the socio-economic citizenship that we would like to be and engage in, obviously that opens up multiple actions thereafter. And that brings me to the third question that I want to address. If you accept that as a perspective, what should then the industry or business do to actually translate that perspective into meaningful outcomes? At a broad level, there are two options. You earn profit, spend a part of that profit on initiatives that have positive social or environmental outcomes. And this is what governments around the world and now in India also are proposing and recommending and possibly mandating at some stage to say that you should spend a part of your profit on activities that are socially or environmentally beneficial. That is good at one level. it brings some supplemental investments into areas that require more and more investment, supplement what already the governments and multilateral agencies and various foundations are doing. And in addition to those investments, probably some managerial capacity will also be brought in and initiatives get managed as an expectation from business or commercial enterprises. But will this make a significant difference to all the numbers that we talked about? I personally don't think so. If every company spends a couple of % of its profit on these kind of initiatives, will we see that swing shifting 50% owning 1% or consuming 2.5%? Will it move to something like 10 or 15 or 20%? That also I don't think is a reasonable level of expectation that one can have out of such initiatives. Because the level of scale that can happen, the amount of money that the government spends on, since we talked about agriculture, rural development, compared to that, what corporates earn as a profit, and of that some percentage spent on that will be insignificant. So if you think just that alone, with some managerial capacity good enough to achieve inclusive growth and sustainability, it is very unlikely. That pushes us actually to explore another option, which is you build business strategies themselves using inclusive growth and sustainability lenses. It's not that you spend some part of your profit on that, but the very business model is innovated in such a manner that the apparent conflict that arises out of any corporate action, the reason why some of these are challenging, because I say I want to earn a profit and therefore I do some damage to environment, I do some damage to society, and then only I can earn more profit as an apparent conflict. How do you enmesh these two in a manner that they are not apparent conflicts, but in reality you actually enhance profit by also adding value to society and environment? So business strategy itself, the business model themselves will need to morph in a manner that this apparently conflicting aspect needs to be countered. So in that sense, in addition to earning more profits, more incomes to more people, in that sense as a social benefit, using less natural resources or regenerating more natural resources than you consume as the metrics that really use to build such business models. So to my mind, something like that is the perspective that industry should take and then action to be able to deliver the aspirations of people at large in terms of inclusive growth or sustainability. And there are plenty of possibilities in this direction. And this is also not just a wishful thinking that that kind of a conflict can be resolved. And several companies around the world have started attempting this approach. And let me share a few examples in terms of what we have been doing in ITC in this direction, so that it is not just a thinking in the direction, but also action in resolving this apparent conflict between profits and what is good to society and environment. As part of introduction, we talked about ITC e-Choupal, and some of you have also done the case. But just at a broad level, if one were to look at how it resolves conflict in two dimensions. One, in a traditional agricultural marketing channel, the transaction costs that are incurred between a farm and a consumer are done in such a manner by virtue of multiplicity of intermediaries, access to information and knowledge, and significant amount of handling costs and transportation and such costs. All this means that the share of a consumer price that farmer is getting tends to be lower than what is possible. So that's an intervention the first phase of e-Chopal had done, to say that for all of these kind of costs, the singular root cause is the price discovery that is happening in a third place, as opposed to a farm where it is getting produced or a factory where it is getting processed, a third place like a market yard. All of these problems are arising. Therefore, if a price discovery can happen in the village itself, a significant amount of cost can be eliminated, and as a result, it is possible to transfer a larger share of a consumer price to the farmer.